Hello friends, and welcome to this week's Bible study. Trust this message finds you blessed, encouraged and walking with the Lord Jesus, and indeed that you're preparing your way before him as his sudden return is expected. Now, we started a couple of weeks ago a new study on the book of Daniel, and this is our third session, and we're going to be starting Daniel chapter 2, which is the famous dream of King Nebuchadnezzar and his great statue. So we'll be studying this chapter over 2 weeks because there's a lot to get through, and firstly there's a lot of history to consider, but there's also indeed a lot of speculation about what it could mean for future days. So it'd be too much for one chapter, for one session. So let's start, and we'll look at Daniel chapter 2 verse 1 says, "Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him." And what is meant by King Nebuchadnezzar's second year of reign is uncertain. It's certainly obviously not the second year of his reign over Babylon. So presumably, this being a Jewish book, it was written indeed with regard to Judah or Jerusalem. And so in some way this was Nebuchadnezzar's second year. If it was the second year after he first indeed conquered or subdued Judah and took Daniel away captive, then this would be 604 BC, and Daniel and his three friends wouldn't have completed their 3-year trial period when they were being trained in the ways of Babylon. So perhaps it's referring to a later date in Babylonians' dealings with Judah, perhaps when Nebuchadnezzar replaced the kings, or indeed finally destroyed the temple. Anyway, so that set the time, although we don't know exactly when Daniel and his compatriots would have understood what was meant by this phrase. Now God has placed these 3 young Jewish men where he wanted them to be. Now he starts to unfold his purposes for their lives. They are going to have a real adventure, and God will bless them, but they will also suffer persecution. But through it all, the God of Israel will be seen to be the only true God. In the forthcoming chapters, we see Nebuchadnezzar coming under greater and greater conviction concerning the God of Israel, until finally he humbles himself. The Lord starts by giving the king a dream, and then causing him to forget that very dream. God was about to humiliate the Babylonian sorcerers and astrologers. They would be seen to be empty and powerless, without any insight into what they actually called the realm of the gods. So let's read Daniel chapter 2 verses 2 to 12. "Then the king gave the commandment to the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And now the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation." Verse 5, "The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses are made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation." They answered again and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation." The king answered and said, "I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. If you have agreed to speak, lying and corrupt words before me until the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you have given me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things from any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave a command to destroy all the wise men in Babylon. It appears from this passage that the king was fed up with these occultic wise men and their empty sorcery. He doubted their ability, suspected it was all a sham, and believed he would be better off without them. He certainly charges the wise men with speaking lies. Perhaps the Spirit of God was working upon the heart of the king, such that he is increasingly dissatisfied with the Babylonian religion. The sorcerers may have been able to suggest a fanciful interpretation if the king could have told them his dream. But only the Spirit of the Most High God could reveal both the dream and the interpretation. The demand of the king appears to be totally rash and unreasonable, and demonstrates something of the nature of this man's style of rule, as well as his character. However, the king's decision was engineered by God to prove to everyone the superiority of the Jews' God and the validity of Daniel's interpretation. The God of Israel was about to be honored in the most powerful royal court in the world, and his prophet would be recognized as being a true representative of the divine. Daniel 2, verses 13 to 18. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then, with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Araziah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel had not been included among the wise men who initially saw the king, and he was ignorant of the reason behind the order to execute the wise men. Rather than being overcome with fear and terror, Daniel calmly demonstrated faith and wisdom. He went into the king, not with excuses or complaints, but simply to ask for time. The king responded to his request. The lives of all the wise men now rested on Daniel hearing from the living God. Verses 9 to 23. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand." The revelation Daniel received was not only an explanation of the king's dream, but it was also a revelation concerning the power and majesty of God. The God of Israel was reigning over the affairs of all the nations of the world, including Babylon with its sorcery. There are no situations in which our God is not sufficient. There are no circumstances where God cannot cope or cannot deliver those who trust in him. We will see throughout the rest of this book that the revelations that God gave Daniel did not puff him up or fill him with pride. Rather, he remained humble before the awesome and powerful Godhead. This is likely to be one of the reasons why Daniel continued in senior government for over 70 years. The man's integrity and prayerfulness were other factors. Daniel recognized that it is our God who raises up and removes kings, governments and nations. It is our God who can change the times and the seasons. It is our God who gives wisdom and knowledge. There are spiritual seasons for individuals, churches and even nations. It is God we need to seek to change the season. So let's move on to the dream and interpretation, verses 24 and 25. Therefore Daniel said to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. It appears Arioch's taking credit for finding Daniel. Daniel, however, does not take any of the credit for himself, but honours only God. Verses 26 to 30. Then the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers and magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed are these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So Daniel honours God before the king, and God will later honour Daniel through the king. Daniel tells the king that it is his God who gives the interpretation, and that this is the same God whom the king does not know, that gave the king his kingdom. We'll read that in verse 37. So that was a real fearless challenge to the king's pride. Let's read verses 31 to 35. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This image, whose splendour was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold. Its chest and arms, its belly and thighs, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so no trace of them was found. And the stone which struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So the king's dream was of a giant statue, and we'll show some pictures as we indeed give this presentation. And Daniel will explain that the statue represented various successive empires. Each of these empires is to rule over the Middle East, including Israel, and each would affect the temple in some way. Each empire is represented by a differing material of decreasing value. History would show that each empire would have a differing style of government. We recognize that through the king's dream and interpretation, God was revealing the forces that would be controlling the Middle East for the period of what we might call the time of the Gentiles. This is not only a foretelling of things that would come to pass, but is the blueprint of God's design for the ages to come. It shows that the sovereign God has designed and purposed all these things. Now, the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw was not stable. It was top heavy, Moving up the image, each successive material is heavier than the last. Now we use the thing called specific gravity actually to measure a material's sort of weight compared to or measure its density. And so a material that has a specific density of 10 will actually be 10 times heavier than water for the same volume. And a material that has a specific density of 5 would be 5 times heavier for the same volume as a measure of water. And as we look at the materials in this, clay has a specific density of 1.9, almost twice the weight of water for the same volume. Iron is much heavier and has a specific density of 7.6. Copper is actually heavier than iron and has a specific density of 8.5. Silver has a specific density of 10.5, and gold is the heaviest of them all with a specific density of 19.3. So this is a top heavy indeed statue, and of course if it did exist, then the clay and iron feet would be crushed by the weight above it, and the thing would indeed come toppling down. And that does indeed remind us that the empires of this world are unstable. The empires of this world will fall. No matter how grand they may appear for a period of time, they are passing away. We notice that each successive material is less valuable than its predecessor. So gold is the most valuable. And then as time moved on in the next empire, it was silver, which was less valuable than gold, but more valuable than the bronze or the copper that followed it, which was more valuable than the iron. And of course, that was more valuable than the clay. So as the empires evolve and transform and change, they're actually diminishing in many ways. The base of clay mixed with iron is soft and unstable, and we see that the foundations of this world are flawed and unstable. Later in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel receives a vision of the same successive empires. The vision is very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but in Daniel's vision, there are only 4 empires. The 4th empire changes into the final empire or 5th empire. And the details of the final empire in Daniel's vision chapter 7 correspond to John's revelation of the blasphemous kingdom of the Antichrist, which is described in the book of Revelation. Let's come back to Daniel chapter 2 and read verses 36 to 40. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the earth and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. But after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a 3rd kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. And a 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all other kingdoms. So let's look at these first 4 empires. The first empire, we're told directly by Daniel, is Babylon. And the Babylonian Empire ran from 603 BC to 538 BC. Nebuchadnezzar is clearly told that his kingdom is the golden head of the image. This is the most precious material within the vision. In verse 39, Daniel describes the other kingdoms as being inferior. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that he's become so great because the God of heaven has given him the kingdom. Babylon was an autocratic kingdom where one person had absolute rule. It was the Babylonians who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 587/586 BC. The second empire is the Medo-Persian Empire, and that ran from 538 to 334 BC. The Babylonian empire was destroyed by the Medo-Persian Empire, which is represented in the image by the silver chest and arms. The Medo-Persian Empire was oligarchic, which means that the government was indeed done by a select few. Even the emperor had to obey the law of the Medes and Persians, and we'll read about that in Daniel chapter 6. It was the king of this empire, Cyrus the Mede, who gave the order for the temple at Jerusalem to be rebuilt. This was completed in 516 BC, 70 years after the first temple was destroyed. The third empire is then the Greek Empire, which ran from 334 to 31 BC. So the Median Empire was destroyed by Alexander the Great, and the Greek Empire is represented by the belly and thighs of bronze. This government was aristocratic, which was held by a military nobility. After the death of Alexander, the Greek Empire was divided into 4 sections, each ruled by one of Alexander's 4 generals. 2 of these empires continually battled for supremacy in the area, which included Judah. These were the Ptolemaic kingdom based in Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom based in Damascus. The Seleucid rulers were intolerant of Hebrew culture and brought extreme pressure to Hellenize the Jews. This came to a climax with the desecration of the temple and the persecution of the Jews by Antiochus IV in 167 BC. A later section in our study in chapter 11 provides a detailed description of Antiochus's attempt to eradicate Judaism, his defiling of the temple and the persecution of God's people. So we'll look at that when we get to chapter 11. And the fourth empire, which indeed replaced the Greek Empire, was the Roman Empire, 31 BC to 636 AD. And the Roman Empire was represented by the Iron Legs. Rome had an imperialistic style of government, and it was ruthless with its military strength. Iron correctly represents the strength and the cruelty of the Roman Empire. In 346 AD, the Roman Empire divided into 2. There was the Western Empire with its capital at Rome, and there was an Eastern Empire with its capital at Constantinople. Some commentators suggest that division is symbolized by the 2 legs of the statue, but this is unlikely. The Western Empire ended after only a few hundred years more, while the Eastern Empire lasted into 1453 AD, which would mean that one leg would have been a lot longer than the other. Also, Nebuchadnezzar's image does not reflect the division of the Greek Empire into 4 after the death of Alexander. Palestine remained under the control of the Eastern Roman Empire until 636 AD. In Zechariah chapter 1, a vision is given of 4 horns or powers that scatter Judah, Israel and Jerusalem. Commentators suggest that these 4 horns are the first 4 kingdoms of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In turn, these horns are terrified when the Lord sends craftsmen to cast out the horns of the nations. And this is Zechariah chapter 1 verses 18 to 21. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and there were 4 horns. And I said to the angel who talked with me, "What are these?" So he answered, "These are the 4 horns that have scattered Judah, Israel and Jerusalem." Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. And I said, "What are these coming to do?" So he said, "These are the horns that scattered Judah, so that no one could lift up his head. But the craftsmen are coming to terrify them, to cast out the horns of the nations that lifted up their horn against the land of Judah, to scatter it." Well, our final section today, because we won't look at the fifth kingdom until next week's study, but our final section, I just want to look at post-Roman history. Now, these first four empires that we just mentioned, well, they are easy to recognize in history, partly because they were successive. The fifth empire, represented by the clay and iron mixed feet, is not so easy to define, and there have been several suggestions as to what the feet represent. But before we look at the text from Daniel, let us look at the history of the era after the Romans. In AD 132, Roman Emperor Hadrian joined the provinces of Judah and Galilee to form the new province of Syria-Palestina. Following the split of the Roman Empire, Palestine was then part of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. In AD 636, following the Battle of Yarmouk, during the Byzantine Arab War, Palestine was captured by Arab forces and the land became part of the Islamic Empire. In AD 1099, the Crusaders captured the land, but in 1187, Saladin's forces regained the area and Palestine was once again under Islamic control. From 1250 to 1517 AD, Egypt, Palestine and Syria were controlled by the Islamic Mamluk Sultanate, whose capital was in Egypt. In 1260, Palestine was raided by the Mongols, but these were ultimately defeated by the Mamluk Sultanate. And in 1516, the Ottoman Turks captured Palestine from the Mamluks. The Ottomans ruled over the region until 1917, although Egypt actually did control the region between 1832 and 1840. But in 1917, Jerusalem was captured by the British Army. Britain was given control of Palestine and the Transjordan under a League of Nations mandate in 1922. Britain had been at war with Turkey, who had aligned themselves to Germany in the First World War. It was in November 1917 that the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, wrote a letter to the leaders of the British Jewish community. The letter, now known as the 1917 Balfour Declaration, includes these words: His Majesty's government's view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of non-Jewish communities in Palestine, all the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you'd bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So under the British mandate, the Jewish agencies for Palestine were to oversee Jewish migration to Palestine and the purchase of land from local Arabs. There was increasing opposition from the Palestine Arabs as to the increasing Jewish migration and the terms of the Balfour Treaty. They too had been given a treaty, which was the Anglo-French Treaty in 1918, in which Britain and France promised to help set up in Syria and Mesopotamia by governments which were national governments and administrations derived from the majority, but from the free exercise of the initiative and choice of the indigenous populations. Britain could not fulfill her promises to the Zionist movements and help Palestine Arabs set up a local government, which would be determined by a majority vote. So violence from both the Palestinian Arabs and the Jews would increase. In 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted to partition the land between the Jews and Arabs, but this was rejected by the Arabs. Civil war was escalating. In 1948, as the British withdrew at the end of their mandate, the State of Israel was declared by the Israelis, and on the basis of that UN partition plan. Thus began the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The re-establishment of the State of Israel is seen by many Bible commentators as a very significant event. It appears that God's prophetic calendar has advanced into a new phase, and the stage is being set for the events of the last days. Well, that will bring us to the end of this week's study. We'll complete chapter 2 next week. The Lord bless you, keep you, and may indeed the word of God excite you and fill you with confidence that the same God who rules and reigns over empires in the past rules and reigns today. Amen.